Do you know what the biggest barrier is to most people getting started in fly fishing? Would you like to hear an easy step to jumping over this barrier? And would you like to see a clear step-by-step path to easily get started in fly fishing, even if you are brand new right now today? I'm going to share the basics of fly fishing and the top 5 insights that we have learned from over 600 podcast interviews and guests that we've had over the years. After today's episode, you will have a clear path to getting started in fly fishing, and I'll share a powerful story about failure on a Montana trout stream and what you can take away from it to help your fishing this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and how you can give back to the fish species you love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone in the world. Today, I'm going to break down a solo episode for you so you have a good idea of how to get started in fly fishing. Like I said, even if you're brand new. I'm going to give you the most noted tips and insights, including the best resources to help on your journey, why you should slow down and observe, and how to practice your fly cast correctly, and much more on top of that. Plus, I'm going to share some awesome tips from Brian at Mad River Outfitters. He gives us his 6 top tips in an episode he did with us a while back. If you're new to fly fishing, you're going to love this series. And if you are experienced, I hope you can share this Getting Started Fly Fishing podcast series with anyone you know that wants to get into it. But before I get started today on these quick tips, I'm going to share a story that brings it back. This is way back, back in Montana. We were doing our senior part. This is our senior trip. We just graduated, and that early summer, we headed out on the road to Montana, and we headed out in a Jeep, an old Jeep Wagoneer, Wagoneer Cherokee, and we drove out. Ryan had the rig, Russ was there, and Jerry, and we did this trip out to Montana. We were out there for over 2 weeks. I think it was like 2.5 weeks, and we stopped along the way, but our destination was Rock Creek in Montana, and we hit that stream. The story I want to share is it was a great trip, but we had this one moment where we had this spot upriver from camp. We were camped kind of in the middle, and we drove up to this spot. It was pretty cool, gravel road, really slow, kind of drinking some beverages along the way. We get up to this spot, which we've caught fish before. There's some dry fly action. You know, we kind of get there early so we can prepare. Nobody else really out there at the time. And we were all fishing. We got going, and we knew the hatch was going to come off. This was kind of July-ish, and I don't even remember what the hatch was, but there was this hatch we knew was going to come off, and it started coming off, and it was on, and you could see this was towards evening, so there was probably hour and a half left of light, and we started going, and I was out there, and Russ was, and we were all out there, and kind of lined up in this little section casting towards the other bank, which was kind of a little bit towards the roadside. And we were catching fish. I was getting a few fish. To be honest, this day, this just shows you a story, is how I don't remember the numbers of fish, the size of fish, but I do remember Ryan, who was probably, I think Russ and I had probably the most experience. Ryan less, and Jerry less as well. And Ryan, I don't remember what Jerry was doing. He was probably just fishing away, but Ryan was having trouble with his cast. And he was getting snagged, and he wasn't catching fish. And I think he was catching himself and just doing all sorts of things. And Russ and I were catching fish, and we were landing them, and we were like, Brian, yeah, you got this, man. And so he kept going, and it was just more struggles and more struggles. And finally, I remember when Ryan just kind of had enough of it. It was just there was still probably 30 minutes of light. It was just prime time. It was on, and Ryan hooked one more tree. I think he broke off his fly. I can't remember if it was a snap, but the fly broke off, and he just turned around and said, I'm done with this fly fishing. He turned around, walked to the bank, and took his entire rod outfit and just hucked it out against the bank and the rocks, and was like, that's it. And it was the first, actually, in my life. I don't remember too many people doing that, so this is a clear memory of the time, but it was just a culmination of frustration. And I share this story because, after that, Ryan did fish some more, and to be honest with you, I haven't talked to Ryan in many years, so I'm not quite sure if he's still out there fishing. I would love to hear from him and see if he is. But at that time, it was just a rough evening for Ryan. And there's probably some things we could have done differently at the time, but I think it paints the picture of what I'm going to talk about here, because I want to share some tips that I think are going to help you avoid this sort of frustration. And what we're going to get into today are tips from Basically, we've done over 600 episodes now on this podcast, and these are some of the most common tips, insights that we've heard from basically some of the best fly anglers from around the country, around the world. And these are things that I hear of over and over and over again, right? So these aren't just your one-offs, and these aren't just tips and tricks. This is a little bit deeper. This is kind of like insights into higher level stuff to be thinking about. And so we're going to get into that in a little bit here, and then we're also going to jump in to we're going to wrap this up with a few more tips from Brian at Mad River Outfitters, like I said. But let's jump into this. Here are the 5 most highlighted insights from over 600 podcast guests over the years. So the number 1 most highlighted insight is get a guide. Get a guide or a group, really. It's get a guide or a group. But we've heard this over and over. If you want to flatten that learning curve, and it's hard to say when you're first getting started, because if you're brand new to it, to say you're going to go out and shell out some money to get a guide, whether that's hundreds of dollars, whatever, that's tough getting started. So I understand that. So maybe before you get to this point, you grab your rod. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And you just kind of get out near your home water and give it a shot. But ultimately, if you want to really increase and flatten that learning curve, hiring a guide is a huge way, because you can find them on your local waters. They're going to help you with your casting, with your insect identification, with all the things around fly fishing. So this is the tip. Along with this is get a group. So if you can't afford a guide, there's lots of groups around the country that are totally free in your area. Many places around the country have these, and they're just fly fishing groups, fly tying groups. But you can get into these and just kind of look them up, Google search it, and find one in your local area, and then stop by, and you can talk to the people in the group. And it's a really good way to learn, because there's likely people in there that are very experienced, and they can help you, again, flatten that learning curve. So that's a huge tip. It goes along with it, whether you want to spend some money for a guide right away or connect with a group. That's a really good tip. There's also fly shops too around the country. In some areas, there might not be a local fly shop nearby where you are, but I definitely search fly fishing groups, fly tying groups as a good way to get started. And this is going to drastically help in answering that question, where do you go if you have questions? So that's going to help quite a bit. So that's the number 1 first stop. Okay, here we go. Let's jump into the number 2 most highlighted insight and tip over the years from all of our guests. And number 2 is observe. So observation, the power of observation. So there's a lot to this, but basically what this means is, instead of just running out in your stream and just start casting and flailing away on the water, take a moment as you're getting ready, prepared to see what's going on and observe what's going on around you. For example, if you're landing at the parking lot, you drive up there and you hop out, take a look and see, are there bugs flying around? Maybe there's some caddis, different bugs that might be hatching on the water, right? As you walk to the creek or the waterway, take a look at what's going on. Do you see any spider webs? Maybe there's some bugs caught in the spider webs, caddis, whatever. You can kind of figure out what's going on. And then as you get there, when you're at the stream, maybe take a moment before you just jump in and start casting and look at the water and see what's going on. You might see some fish rising. You might see some bugs hatching. This has been highlighted many times and really just gets us to focus like, hey, maybe making that first cast right away isn't the best thing, and taking a chance to, observe what's going on. Along with this is kind of journaling, another thing we've heard a lot about. This is kind of tip 2B, I guess. But it's a good idea to bring some sort of a journal, piece of paper, even your phone, and keep track of what, basically just a few notes of what's going on. If you reach the creek, what is the temperature? Is it raining? What's the water like? And then did you catch any fish? Where did you catch any fish? Maybe a few notes like that. There's tons of apps now where you can record your points, right? Trout routes, things like that, where you can keep track of your own points. But anything you think that will be important, so later when you come back to that stream, or as you're preparing, you can take a look at your notes and say, oh yeah, I fished this stream. It might even be the same exact date the previous year, and you can see what happened. It'll give you some good intel on what you might use, right? And so there's tons of things, I can go in deep here. I will highlight the Mad River. Brian notes this in his tips below as well. Just kind of this whole process of observing, keeping track of what you're doing. So observation, another key. That's number 2. So the number three most important insight, and what we've heard over and over again, is practice your cast, right? So when you're out there, it's better to be practicing your cast when you're not really focused on catching a fish, and just focus on the cast, than it is to be on the water trying to catch fish and practice your cast. So, I mean, like we said, the number 1 tip, find a guide, local group, a fly shop. These are all places where they can teach you some basics of cast for free a lot of times, right? So if you go there, they can show you the basics, the 10 to 2, whatever it is, getting started. But then after you've got the basics, you need to practice, right? So that's something you can do. And you can do this in your yard. You can literally take that rod you get, which we're going to touch on in bullet 5 today. But you get your rod, your reel, your line, your leader. On the end, instead of a fly, you just tie a little piece of yarn, a real small piece of yarn. And that yarn allows you to, when you cast in the grass, it kind of hooks the grass a little bit, and it gives you that resistance. You need the resistance of the water to load your rod, and that's what the grass is. So you can practice that, practice the 10 to 2 and just trying to get it in a hoop. Maybe throw a hula hoop or a pie plate or something out there and see if you can cast to it, right? And also practice roll casting. Roll casting is very important. Something you should also be learning as well. But again, this is something where over and over again, and I've been at fault of this too, where you're out there and maybe when I was practicing my spay cast, actually I did really good. When I first started learning to spay cast, this is back when I was learning to spay cast before we did our Skeena trip, and I had the spay rod, and I had a month to go before our big Skeena trip, and I was out there on the water every single day for 30 days practicing the spay cast, and I wasn't fishing at all. I was just literally going to the run, practicing the cast, watching Simon Gosworth videos, and then going out and trying to implement it. And I did that for 30 days, and it was good enough when I got out there on the water, even though I taught myself. I had lots of mistakes along the way and all that stuff. I still caught some huge fish, and it was amazing, right? So remember, practice, always practice, and don't worry about catching the fish right away. And so I am going to highlight 2 other things. If it's show season, January, February, March, there's lots of, FFI certified instructors, people at the shows where they do these sorts of things. So that's a good place to go. Also, if you want to check out an episode we did, Steve Rajeff was on an episode. You could check that out. That was episode number 573. So if you go to wetflyswing.com/573, you can listen to the story of one of the greatest fly casters in pretty much the history. And actually, this is Tim Rajeff. He talked about Steve. So you can check in there on that one. And yeah, it's just amazing stuff. But keep it, again, don't get too focused on the fish right away. You obviously want to catch fish. We're going to get you into catching fish. But remember to get that cast practice. Okay, and here's a tip, number 4, that's going to help you actually catch some fish. So this is an on the water kind of implementation. So when you are out there fishing, just get out there. And once you are fishing, you're going to have some tips maybe from that group or that shop. You're on the water. You're wondering what to put on. Maybe you have this fly. You see a fly you think is going to work. Maybe you see a bug and you're like, oh, that's the one I want. You look in your fly box and you grab a fly. The rule of thumb here is always use a little smaller fly than you think. And this is important because we tend to put bigger flies on there. And typically smaller is better in a lot of situations. And so this was highlighted by Rick Hafley, who was on in a past episode, and he mentioned that you always go one size smaller than the fly that's out there, right? So if it's a size 12, and we'll get more into this at a later point, if it's a size 12, you probably want to try a size 14, pick that out for your fly. And also on the same line, not only is smaller, but sparser as well. So once you get into fly tying, a tip for later if you haven't got into this, when you're fly tying, that's another thing. Bulk is a problem people have, putting too much stuff. So use 50% less of the materials that you think for any sort of fly you're using. So if you're putting dubbing on and you grab you're new to it, use half of the dubbing that you think you should put on. You could always put more on, but it's hard to take away dubbing. That's the bonus fly tying tip. And I'm going to highlight episode 497 with Rick Hafley. That was on the podcast, episode 497. You can hear some of his tips where he talks about that. And the final number 5 tip, and really these are more insights and highlights that we've heard over and over and over again, is what? Is the KISS method. KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it simple, stupid. That's that keep it simple, stupid. And really this applies to most everything in fly fishing, and I kind of leave it to the end here because really this is what people get tied up in fly fishing when they don't know about it. They think, oh my God, how do I learn to cast and get the right gear and choose the fly and choose the river and do all this stuff, right? It's overwhelming. And really, you can keep it simple. And there is lots of ways. Like, for example, let's start with gear. Rod, reel, line, leader. I mean, it's really basic as far as what you need. And people also think it's really expensive. There's lots of outfits out there for $100, a little over $100, $200 for really quality, not only the rod, but the rod, reel, line, and leader. You're good to go. You can get a few flies and you're on the water. And the other thing is, and you can get these, a lot of outdoor stores have them. If you have a local fly shop, of course, but anywhere where you can pick up this, and you can reach out to me if you have questions, but there's basically not a bad rod these days. Even the lowest price rods pretty much are good to go. Typically, depending on what you're fishing, There's different weights. A 9-foot 5 weight is really typical for getting started in fly fishing. So we'll talk about that at a later point, what that means. But essentially, it's a good all-around rod. So that's one thing. The gear is easy. And then it's like, where do you go fishing, right? Where is that water body? Are you fishing a river, a lake, whatever? And this is also keeping it simple. Don't feel like you have to go to the greatest trout stream in the world and even fish for trout. I mean, there's tons of lakes and ponds right around your water, depending where you are in the country, that are just as good for getting started. And really, it's just water. I mean, any waterway likely has fish in it, whether that's warm water fish or cold water, and it's a great place to get started. Like I said, you could practice that cast, and then when you're on the water, there's fish, you can catch fish there. Sunfish, including bluegill, bass, smallmouth, largemouth. I mean, depending on where you are, there is a fish out there. So don't get stuck on the fact that this has to be perfect. You just want to get to the water. And a good tip there is, again, looking at those local groups, asking people where they're going. You could do some online research, Facebook groups, search your area. If you're in Oklahoma, search Oklahoma Facebook. Go to Facebook, search Oklahoma fly fishing, right? Sorts of things, they pop up. And so keep it simple. That is the key here. Keep it simple. Don't try to make this way more complicated. The cool thing about fly fishing is it can be super you can make it complicated, and that's fun, right? So once you dial in your cast, once you have that good cast, you get through these first 5 things, right? You get your observation, you're learning about that, what you're starting to learn about what's working. You got your cast down. You got a few flies that somebody told you that will work, and you're heading out to that water where somebody gave you a heads up you can go fish. Just get out there and do it. And the more you do it, the more you're going to enjoy it, and the more success you're going to have, and you're going to start catching fish. And once you catch that fish, and I've heard this over and over before as well, you are going to be hooked. That's probably the other most common thing we hear is that you are hooked after that fish. So the sooner you get hooked into a fish, the sooner you're going to be hooked into this. So we're going to help you get into that too and get your first fish. And Brian will have some tips below. So that's it. That's the top 5. I'm going to give also one little bonus tip here because conservation is always really important for us, and I think for everybody should be out there. We have a conservation tip, and the tip here, this is the bonus tip, find a local conservation group and volunteer with that group. Really simple. There's tons of these groups around, whether it's Trout Unlimited, FFI, all sorts of other nonprofits. Again, search around, Google search if you have to, your area. And one easy way to do this is to search for Fly Fishers International is one great group that you can go to their website and search for local groups and find somebody near your area, or even just reach out to them and say, hey, I want to help out, and they can connect you with ways that you can kind of give back. And the cool thing about this is that a lot of the people that are in these conservation groups, they're helping to protect the species and all that stuff, are also fly anglers, and they're going to help you go and find spots, right? And find places to go to and all that stuff. So we'll have a link there. I do want to highlight one episode that was pretty memorable for us. We had Yvon Chouinard on, the Patagonia founder, and he is one of the biggest influences, I think, and a great role model for businesses from, and what he's done with Patagonia and everything. So I will highlight that episode. That was episode 536 of the podcast. And if you check that out, you can hear Yvon, the story of some things you can do. And his recommendation was local groups that are great. And really, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do to give back. All right, that's it for our big tips, our big takeaways. I hope you enjoyed those. They're supposed to be high level because I want you to start thinking high level. When we get into the nitty gritty of fly casting and choosing a fly and all that stuff, that's to come. But I think what I gave you today will get you out there on the water and to let you realize that really there's tons of people out there to help. And when you get going, you're going to love this thing. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. And I will definitely be there to help you out, and I can answer any questions. Like I said, we've got over 600 episodes now, and with all that content, there's definitely an episode probably in your local area, your state, where I can point you to, and some people you can get in touch with. And if you want to follow up more on this one too, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/getting started, and you'll get a PDF download there with all these, basically a summary of these tips we talked about here. Plus, we're going to have some other information there on other things you can do. As we break this out, we're going to have some more in this series of getting started in fly fishing. And so there will be some more podcast episodes that you can check out, some more links to great content, and everything we talked about today will be over there. So we're going to help you get started. And if you get a chance, it would be amazing if you could subscribe or follow the show if you're on Apple Podcasts or any of the other apps out there. That way you'll get updated when that next episode goes live. Now we're going to jump in with Brian at Mad River Outfitters. We're going to give this is his 6 tips. This was from episode 374. if you want to follow along with that and check out Brian, he's got a great YouTube channel. He's got amazing content going on there. So we're going to share this really quick, and these are just going to help you, again, build on what we just talked about. And these are some practical tips. So here we go. Number 1 from Brian at Mad River Outfitters, focus on versatile flies. So he says, start with a collection of versatile flies that can be used in a variety of conditions. These might include the woolly bugger, the elk-hair caddis, the pheasant-tailed nip, the Adam's dry fly, the Griffiths gnat. Boom. So we just gave you right there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flies that are definitely will work just about anywhere for many species as well. So all those flies, so make note of those. Those are awesome flies. All right, number 2, learn to match the hatch. Brian says, understanding the local insect life and what fish are feeding on in your local area is crucial. Matching the hatch means selecting flies that resemble the insects fish are currently feeding on, right? So you hear this a lot, matching the hatch, and that's really what it means. You've had fish in the creek. If you're using bait, right, a spinning rod, you'd be throwing in, they'd be eating the bait. But here, we're trying to imitate a fly, an insect, right? And that's where the woolly bugger can imitate a leech or another fish. An elk hair is a caddis, right? Pheasant tail imitates mayflies and different things like that. So, everything we're trying to imitate. So the more you learn about, your water and what's hatching, right? That's part of the entomology. This is more like 201, right? So these are a little bit higher level, but this is stuff as you get into it that you can learn about. All right, number 3. And this kind of goes back to our KISS methods. And he says, start simple. Don't overwhelm yourself with too many flight patterns. Begin with a few simple, proven patterns that are known to work in a variety of conditions. And he just gave us that in number 1. So if you just took those 5 species, guaranteed you would have a very good chance of getting a fish. Number 4, practice fly selection. He says, pay attention to size, color, and type of flies that work well in your fishing areas. This understanding will improve over time as you gain experience and observe. Again, so a couple key that we hit on, right? He's talking about observing again and paying attention to size, color, and type. So you see that bug on the water, you can catch it with a little net or your hand. One little tip, if you are trying to catch a bug and it's flying, if you lick your hands and then swipe through the bugs, it will stick to your hand. And then you can look at it and see what size is it, right? Compare it. Is it a size 12? And then compare that to what you have in your box. Look at the color. Is it brown? Is it kind of orangish? Is it dark? And then what type of fly? Can you identify it by its wings? Is it a caddisfly, a mayfly, all this stuff, right? So again, back to observing and understanding and paying attention. All right, number 5 from Brian. He says, consider the season. The time of year can greatly influence what types of flies you use. He says, be prepared to switch up your flies within the seasons as different insects become more prevalent at different times. So this is throughout the season, a good reminder that as you're getting in there, one fly might work great during this season, say the springtime, but later in the season, they might be gone and there's something else going on. So that's where the journaling will come into play as you learn about this and you educate yourself. You're going to learn, you'll write that down in your journal and you'll say, okay, in the summertime, I saw this hatch, on July, 14th. And then that's something that you've added to your intel. All right, number 6, we're going to wrap it up here with what we've talked about over and over again, and maybe this might be even the number 1, is observe and adapt. If you're not having success with one type of fly, don't hesitate to switch to another type. Adaptability is the key to fishing. So not only observing, but success is being able to adapt. So if you're out there fishing, and there's no rule of thumb on this, but if you're fishing and you're not catching something on a fly, always try. It's a good idea to switch it up and try something else. We're going to teach you all about your different types of fishing. Once you got the cast down, once you kind of have success there, we're going to share different types of fishing, right? Whether that's a dry fly, a nymph, which is under the surface, and different types. So there's all this, but we're keeping it simple, remember, on this thing. So there's Brian's 6 tips. Now you've got a total of 12 tips. 12 tips to get you going here. And I hope that gives you a little bit of understanding on what you need to get started. I really wanted to let you know that you can do this, and you got a bunch of people that are here to help you along the way. So if you're brand spanking new to fly fishing, if you've never done it before, I'm telling you, it seems way more complicated than it is, and people think it is. And once you get going, you'll realize it's not. And so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to keep it simple in this one. I'm going to keep this one simple, and I'm going to leave you with one quote to be thinking about. And this one comes from Brian, Mad River Outfitters. He says, when you're choosing a fly, it's not just about what you think looks good. It's about understanding what's happening in the water, what the fish are eating, and matching that. It's really a game of observation and making educated guesses. Sometimes it's more about the presentation than the pattern itself. There it is. Another reminder, right? Another reminder. I think observation is going to be in the title of this episode because it is coming up over and over again. And I'm excited to be on this journey with you. I'm excited to hear some stories. If you get out there and give it a shot, please check in with me. Please follow this show so you can get reminded when we get more of these beginner getting started segments that are going to be coming out as we go. And I'm just excited to hear about your first fish. If you're brand new and you just got your first fish, please send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. If you have any ideas for a show episode, how we can do this better, please check in with me anytime. Let me know. And if you want to get more of the information here, go to wetflyswing.com/getting started. And you can see a blog post there with links, everything you need to take this further. And we're going to be here on your journey if you're brand new. If you've been listening and you're just checking this out because you wanted to hear about this, you're not a beginner, please share this episode with somebody else you know that might need some help getting started. And this will be really easy because we're making this as short as possible and a way for you to help them. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave this one. I hope you enjoyed this short snippet episode, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you on the water. And if you have any questions, any other feedback, please check in with me. Like I said, anytime. I am excited to hear some good stories. Hope you have a great afternoon, great evening, or great morning wherever in the world you are, and I appreciate you for stopping by and checking out the show today. We'll talk to you soon.